and welcome home. In this podcast, we venture into what it means to be a leader in this new world. Human, flawed but working on things, and forever changed by using our intuition to guide us. I'm Adelina East, founder of Transformational Healing and mentor to those running soul-based businesses. Join me to receive transformational healing, tips to dive more deeply into your unique spiritual gifts, and to hear great conversations with other entrepreneurs in spirit. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Cosmic Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Adelina East. I'm an EMDR therapist, and I work with people to overcome trauma from wherever they start. I also have my own modality that blends neuroscience and spirituality to help people heal from trauma. And I deliver those sessions here on this podcast every few weeks or so. I started this podcast so that we could all hear from other people who have inspired me on my trauma healing journey and also be able to tap into some trauma healing that is at no cost to you. So I really appreciate all of you being here. We are still on the top 50 of the Good Pods charts. Thank you a million times for continuing to listen to this podcast, subscribe and rate it and review it. All of these things help. All of these things help me get the guests on that you all have asked for too. So please do take a minute and go over there and subscribe, write a little review, say something. It really helps us so much. Today's conversation is with Dr. Amanda Hanson. I found her because since I have moved to the desert, I've had some really different physical symptoms. If you've been listening for a while, I have several long-term illnesses that I work with on a daily basis and try to heal from. But there were some other little things popping up. And I had to eventually admit that I am in perimenopause. My 45th birthday is next week. And though I love getting older and it's been such a great experience for me, there are some physical things that are pretty annoying. So I started looking out for help. I found Dr. Amanda Hanson. She is called the Midlife Muse on Instagram. She's a doctor of psychology, speaker, and author renowned for her transformative work in redefining the paradigm of womanhood. In over 25 years of her career, she's reached millions of women across the globe. The reason that I invited her on this podcast is because I think that she is pretty amazing to be navigating midlife in this way. I like that she approaches it from a holistic standpoint. I like that she's more open to different kinds of things. And I think that is rare in today's world. As most of you know, I lived in New York for a lot of my life, and then I lived overseas. And I found that people approach midlife very differently outside of America. It is just not such a big deal. They're looked up to as wise people. They're asked for advice. No one is freaking out about it. But here in the States, people freak out about it. There's a lot of Botox happening, a lot of plastic surgery happening. There's a lot of, vaginal rejuvenation and all of these things. And all of that's awesome if that's what works for you, if it makes you feel good about yourself. But I wanted to approach it from a more natural standpoint, not only because that's what I prioritize, but also because of my health issues. There's just no way to do it any other way. So I'm excited to chat with her. We're both therapists. We work mostly with those who identify as women. But as all of you know, I am a queer woman, which does give me a different perspective. And I do work with a lot of people in the queer community. So you will hear us today talk about lots of amazing things. We talk about the patriarchy and how that has impacted this midlife thing. We talk about the ways that the patriarchy make us feel as midlife women and the way that they impact different research studies. You'll also hear us possibly disagree on some things. And so I want you to know that I trust whatever you've chosen to do in this midlife moment, if you're having one, or if you love someone who's having a midlife moment. If you identify as a woman and you've chosen to take HRT, I completely support you. I think that everybody has to do whatever feels right to them. Because of my health issues, I've chosen to take plant-based hormones that my doctor has compounded for me. I 100% understand the privilege in this. It is not cheap. It is something that I probably would not do if I were not racked with all of these other health issues, but I have to. And so, though Dr. Amanda and I may disagree on HRT, I completely understand her perspective. I understand what she's saying about how different research studies have been funded by perhaps companies that sell that thing. And that is possible too. I trust you in your own judgment. Make your own decisions. Do your research. Feel what feels good in your body. Know yourself, and you can kind of see what things work for you. Whatever you need to do is support it. I just want you to know that before we head in. Of course, I think the natural path is amazing if you can possibly do it, but I have known women that really cannot. They've tried all of the herbs. They've tried all of the plant-based compounded hormones, and it's just not working for them. I support you whatever you choose. And without any further ado, here is my conversation with the incredible, amazing Dr. Amanda Hanson. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Cosmic Leadership Podcast. You heard me introduce her in the intro. She is an incredible human being and has been such an inspiration to me while I've been on this journey called hormonal issues, perimenopause, whatever you would like to call it. And her name is Dr. Amanda Hanson. Dr. Amanda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to have that conversation and so many others.
Okay, great. So can you tell us a little bit about your story of how you got involved in doing this work?
Yes, I've been a clinical psychologist with my doctorate for over 25 years, and I was doing what probably most traditionally trained psychologists were doing. I went from graduate school right into private practice and started seeing clients. And I was seeing clients in the best way that I knew how, under the way I'd been trained, and it seemed to all be going quite well. And then when unexpectedly I found myself pregnant at a very young age, I was 27, and I started studying and really understanding everything I could get my hands on in regards to pregnancy, birth, and particularly natural childbirth. What opened up to me was an entire world of feminine power that I'd never seen in my family. I'd never heard women speak of. I'd not learned about anywhere, even in graduate school, about feminine power of any real sort. I took a feminism class. But everything that I learned about being a woman was still under the guise of patriarchal standards for being a woman. And so it took me deeper and deeper into this dive. And then I got myself into rooms and spaces and places with women who had done natural childbirth, who were breastfeeding. And it changed the course of not only my personal life forever, but also the way I saw my clients, which were primarily women at the time and forever have been now, in the work of psychology. Because there's this beautiful bridge that I think has been, through the last several thousand years, has been taken down, if you will.
Yes.
And we are not connected to our power. And so when I started to bring a lot of this ancient and holistic rooting and practice back in, and having women connect with themselves in their pain, in their struggle, in their heartbreak, had nothing to do with pregnancy or not. Most of my clients weren't even pregnant. I tapped into something and watched them get results that sitting and doing just cerebral talk therapy was not giving us the same access to. So it's just something I live my life very in my body. I'm a deeply embodied woman. And so that's how this all came to be. The power is unbelievable, unlike anything else.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What do you mean by that?
Yes, I think that let's just say before that time in my life, prior to 27, I was going around the world, and there's this prescriptive list of how to be happy and what it looks like to be successful. And I was checking all of the boxes. The patriarchal boxes were checked and then some. Anyone to have looked at my life, to understood that deep down there was something, I was ravenous for something more. I couldn't yet articulate what the more was. I had no idea what it was. I just knew that something felt like it was missing. Turns out all my clients report this when we start, meeting and talking. And what is missing is that power of my knowing, of my intuition, of this way that when I look around in the world, I don't see a lot of women living by, because they're still in the please the patriarchy, please the men, let's post for them, let's say yes in the ways they need us to say yes, because anything else is very disruptive. So tapping into that power and that knowing as a woman has been so incredible, not just for myself, my business, but my family, my adult children, my community. It's just changed so much. And I understand why it can be such a threat, that power that women hold, because when she taps into that, things really do change. And I just know if a lot of people are ready for that. Thankfully, I'm with a very open partner. We've been married for 28 years, who is very interested in always learning from me and expanding in his own way, but not threatened by my expansion and my leadership in our family.
That's amazing. I feel like that's one of the things that's so hard as a therapist. I've been a therapist for almost 15 years, is trying to navigate those types of dynamics when your client is married or partnered to someone who cannot stand it when she's in her own power. Of course, you don't want to say things that will upset the relationship, but it's so difficult for the woman to live. And what I've found as a therapist for so many years is that oftentimes the relationship dissolves because she's working so hard at putting herself forward and really being the leader of the family, or being the leader in her career, or being the leader with raising her kids. And so finding different ways to tap into this female power that allows each woman to feel completely embodied and completely able to take on the world is just so important. It's one of the reasons I love your work so much, especially for women my age.
Thank you so much. I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And it's painful when you see that the partner's just not going to come along. And I work with women on so many beautiful strategies around building a bridge towards him, building a new chapter they've never even adventured into before, and to get to back him into the excitement of it and the beauty of it. And sometimes it works. And sometimes it doesn't. And I say to my clients, as sad as it is, you have a choice. You can go back to living how you were living prior to this work.
Right.
And they always tell me it would feel like a death, Amanda. It would feel like a death to go back to living that small again. And I also believe that not every relationship is meant to be forever. I think it's wonderful and beautiful to acknowledge we've really grown and expanded together. We've walked each other as far as we could. And it doesn't mean anybody's wrong. Nobody's bad. It just means it's a completion, because our next phase is meant to be walked out with ourselves, with our girlfriends, maybe another partner or lover, who knows. But I don't ever think it's because somebody's wrong, bad, less than. It's just, we're all meant for different journeys. And that gets to be okay.
That's true. And I think so often in our culture of patriarchy, this openness and expansion into your full power doesn't happen until the kids are in high school or maybe even out to college, because you're just so busy. It's our culture to force upon the woman the role of making the lunches, taking the kids to school, plus working full time, plus cooking, plus doing all the things at home, doing the emotional labor of every relationship, that it doesn't happen until later in life. And unfortunately, for many people, that also ties into perimenopause or menopause. So not only do you have all of the hormonal disruption, but you also have this huge change in perspective all at the same time. And as a queer woman, thankfully, I get to be with other incredibly strong women to walk my life through.
Yeah.
But even queer women have this as well. You know, there is sometimes a more masculine partner that can't handle your power. There is sometimes a mother or a father that you're caring for that can't handle your power. And so regardless of whether you are partnered, queer, straight, whatever, there are always going to be people in the world who cannot handle your full power. Absolutely. And so what I love is that you talk so much about how, like, the step by step almost of how to handle those relationships. Can we dig into that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it is often a threat to the unspoken contract that we come into the relationship with. And somehow it's maybe the unconscious interpretation is if you change or you gain more power, you might not be happy with what I bring to the table. It might not be enough anymore. Right. And so that is for that own person to do their own work around. And very possibly it may be, like I said, the end of the road for them. But I started playing with these two archetypes. Actually, I just posted a reel before we came on my Instagram today about two archetypes that I came up with for my own life a long time ago. It is the princess and the queen to really help me understand, like, noticing like when I slip into that. Princess for me is the seeking validation, worth, approval outside of myself. And the queen is more grounded and she is being self-approving. She is owning her own worth and her opinions even if it disrupts the status quo. And so oftentimes what I tell my clients, and this goes for friendships as well.
Right.
This goes for places of business.
Right.
Oftentimes what we got into these unspoken contracts around, whether it was relationships or work, when we were in princess energy, often are no longer fulfilling for us when we have now stepped into this like queen energy, this queen ownership of our truth, our voice, our power, our needs, our boundaries. So it's one of the most common, for lack of a better word, symptoms I see with people who work with me is a lot of the relationships, if the other person isn't on a path of self-development as well, they typically run the course because what we stepped into in that princess energy just doesn't work for our lives any longer in queen energy.
Very true. And I think part of the challenge there too is noticing when you are in princess energy,
even on words and in terms of like thinking about it. I rather than using the word force, I stay in a lot of curiosity because I don't want to even be in resistance to it. I want to be curious, like why she's showing up, because she's usually, when my princess shows up, and she shows up probably more than I'd like to admit, I get really curious, like, okay, what's going on?
Happening?
Mm-hmm. Why are you feeling the need to get that person's approval? Or why are you so upset that person doesn't see it the way you see it? Or, I think for me, that helps me learn so much more about myself when I stay in the curiosity. And then typically that vulnerability percolates and I'm like, oh, there it is. Okay. Yes. Now, what could you do as a queen? What could you do to source through this right now? Right. So I think it feels more invitational when I stay in curiosity rather than like, I'm going to force myself out of this.
Yes. Thank you for that note. I think that's important too. I think when I go into princess energy, it's usually like old patterns repeating, something that I learned in childhood, like, oh, you have to make other people happy, or, oh, it's really important to keep the peace, those kinds of things. Yes. And I get there by going into meditation. If I don't have time to meditate, I will at least excuse myself to the restroom and just think about it or meditate for a minute, just to try to figure out where is it that I was trained to please this person or to do this thing that is not actually in my best interest.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Not even the best interest of the relationship either. Right. Because we put on another brick to that wall away from us. And it's like, I get further away from self-intimacy and intimacy with another friend, partner, my mother, when I don't source through it and come back and say, okay, this is what was happening for me. So for the people that really matter, including myself, it is so beautiful to kind of get to like, okay, what's going on right now? Because in the end, it just gets us further away from ourselves and everyone that we love. If we continue to run from that and not look at it and understand the source of it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I learned when I was doing my degrees, I have a degree in social work and counseling, of course, and also in neuroscience. When I was getting my master's in neuroscience, we learned so much about the ways that those neural pathways work. And so it's so easy to slip back into those old patterns. Our brain knows how to do it so well and is so practiced at going back there. So it's a part of daily life, I think, to just kind of look at ourselves, look at our relationships, and make sure that we're still teaching other people how we want to be treated.
Yes.
We can get into princess mode, and that slips us back into the old relationship dynamic when we want to be moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I have such a visual for that when you were talking. Many years ago, we don't live there now, but many years ago, we lived in coastal Connecticut, and we had knocked down a really old house that had been there since like the 50s and built a home for our family. And they had a way out to the beach from their property where the beautiful natural grasses had worn a very natural path out to the water.
Yeah.
And the way our house was situated, the staircase would not be coming down in that same place. So visually, it's like I see that neural pathway. Like it was already laid. It's so easy to get out to the water. There's no like natural grasses that are going to scratch you or get up against you as you're walking out there. It's going to just be, it's predictable. It's safer. You can see if anything is coming on that path. But the other path, building that other path takes time. And over time, the more we walked it and the more we treaded, if you will, on those grasses, they eventually did lay down. And we did eventually get out to the water. And it didn't always feel as easy as, because like you could look to the left and be like, yeah, but that path is already worn. It's so much easier just to go over there.
Yeah.
But if it's you reap eventually of building this new path, the view is just so worth it.
The view is so worth it. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of your work in relation to being midlife? Your name on Instagram is Midlife Muse.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about the relationship there?
Yes. So I'm 51 now. So 11 years ago, when I was turning 40, it seemed to be all the buzz around me. Every woman in my circles seemed to be really concerned about approaching 40, seemed to be concerned about this stage of life. And I was, in all truth, I was like, what? I don't even understand. Like, what is everyone afraid of? I don't feel like this is something to be scared of. Yeah. And so the more I leaned in and listened, a lot of the things that they were concerned about, again, seemed to be things they would be losing based on the patriarchal standards.
Okay.
So I myself started to really look at and investigate, like, okay, what do you think is coming here, Amanda? What do you anticipate? Maybe there's something you haven't considered. And I hate to go, my husband and I were just talking about this morning as someone who doesn't really seek the help of Western medicine very often. I'm not someone who goes seeking problems. I don't go seeking. I do a lot of natural living. I eat intuitively. I am intuitively connected and deeply embodied in my body. And so I wasn't going to go seeking like this to be a disaster or a problem. But wow, when you do a Google search around midlife or menopause, the things that come are so sad. So incredibly
scary and very scary.
I just wrote a book. My book is in the hands of my publisher right now, but I write about that in the opening of my book, like how I got here, right? And it was this cascading information just coming in and the slippery slope of misery and doom and gloom. There was no inspiration. There was no excitement. I was looking for a leader to get turned on about this time in life. Couldn't find her. And I searched for a couple of years after that in a lot of places. I couldn't find that woman. So I just decided I'm going to become that woman. I'm going to become that woman first for me, then for my daughter, and for all the women watching. Because as it stands right now, there is a lot of fear around midlife. And I have so much to say about that. I mean, I have so much to say about that in terms of emotionality, relationships, physicality, sexuality, sensuality, all of it. But I'll let you lead which questions feel most relevant and pertinent for this conversation.
I think, first of all, I'm very excited for your book. I can't wait to read it. Secondly, I agree with you so wholeheartedly about the fear aspect of all of this. And the way that we get to the fear is by paying attention to popular world thought, not world thought, I'm sorry, popular Western world thought. If you look at other cultures, I am a former UN staffer. So I've lived all over the world. I've watched women go through midlife all over the world, and midlife looks vastly different in other countries. It is a time of deep respect. It is a time of reflection. It is a time of looking at how much you've already contributed to society and feeling really great about that. And also becoming a wiser woman and knowing that people in your community are going to be coming to you for advice, for help, for guidance, because they understand that you've already learned some things. There is literally no fear about menopause. There is no fear about your body stopping bleeding, which I think many of us can't wait for. And there is no fear about your body changing. It's a part of life. Aging is a part of life. We don't need to have $90 million worth of Botox and plastic surgery in order to go through this transition. Women in most of the world, in fact, don't even think about that. It's not even a thing. So a lot of the fear is just fear-mongering by the Western medical industrial complex. And so I love that you push up against that. I love that you're into holistic living. So am I. I love all of the intuitive eating and red light and get your sunlight right in the morning, all of those things. And I feel like that's a great way to kind of move through this without all of the drama. The drama is unnecessary. It is brought about by medical companies wanting to sell drugs, in my opinion.
Absolutely agree with every single word you just said. I think it's a manufactured fear. We have to sit around and think about how can we scare women into needing to purchase something, needing to depend on something. It's how we make the money. And with women in midlife and beyond being the largest consumers, spending trillions of dollars every year, it the market, they're like, oh, this is an open market. How can we now listen, I understand that there are a lot of women in the midlife space who want to come for me. I understand there are a lot of women who believe vastly differently around how I'm speaking. And they see it as the more we talk about how horrible menopause is and the help of HRT and how beautiful it can be, we are going to be able to remove women out of suffering. So that's their stance. And I'm not against everyone's going to make their own choices. What I am a stand for is there's another narrative. And the narrative I believe, the narrative I speak of, that I write about, that I talk about on my podcast is this narrative. It is the narrative that, is it possible that all of those symptoms you are feeling, number one, are meant to be because your body is changing. Your estrogen is meant to drop for a reason. I think Mother Nature knows what she's doing. And what if you got alongside of those symptoms and communed with them rather than fought and resisted them? There is so much for them to teach us.
I know.
There's so much.
I know. And I'm a practitioner of internal family systems. And so I deeply believe in, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a therapeutic practice where you talk to different parts of yourself. And the theory is there are all of these different parts of yourself. There is the fear, but there is also the empowerment. There is the jealousy, but there is also the peace, that kind of thing. But you can also talk to parts of your body. And I have found incredible relief from certain things like night sweats by talking to my body and just saying, okay, what is it that you want me to know? Clearly, you want my attention right now at 2:00 in the morning as I'm dripping with sweat. What do you need me to know? Yeah. And I sit down and journal it out, and there is always something there. It is never silent.
Oh, it's so beautiful. It like makes me emotional. And I think that's why I do this work, because I feel like, just similar to many other phases of a woman's life, this is another place where I feel like she has an opportunity to connect with herself in a way she hasn't before. Otherwise, we just continue to stay further and further disconnected from the magic and the messages. And I agree with you. You know, one of the main symptoms I've been experiencing is extraordinarily dry eyes, painfully dry eyes, and they've become so red as if I hadn't slept at all. And so I started doing a heat therapy on my eyes, 10 minutes first thing in the morning and the last 10 minutes before I, go to bed at night. And oh my gosh, what has come from this practice? Like now I'm like, this is just something I'm going to do for the rest of my life, because it's brought in so much connection and so much beauty. I'm now setting it for 15 minutes instead of 10. But if I would have bypassed that and been like, what the heck is going on? Where are all the medicated eye drops? Give me some HRT so this can stop. I would have missed that deeper connection to myself and all the downloads I've received in those quiet moments just with me. So I'm just such a fan of it. And I think until you hear more women talk the way we are speaking, you don't even believe it exists.
Right.
And I think that's why these conversations are so important to have to begin. I would love to see these kinds of conversations saturating people's social media feeds rather than the constant fear. And my mom ended up having a double mastectomy, and she was on the
sorry.
Thank you. She was on the front lines of when HRT really just started, and they still were super uncertain about how much to give when, and they just gave her so much. And her doctor, her oncologist, said that her form of breast cancer, after they did all of the testing, is estrogen induced. And he was quite confident it was related back to the levels of estrogen she was given during menopause. And so all the more reason, I was already going to do this very naturally, but that for me is all the more reason that I think we as women have to pay attention. They have you sign off on all the risks for a reason. There are risks associated.
And there are alternatives. I have endometriosis as well. So estrogen is just automatically something I cannot do, or my endometriosis will get worse. But there are also plant-based HRT formulations. And my doctor she's such a genius. I love her so much. For anyone who lives in Santa Fe, Dr. Farouz Joukar, the best. She gives all of her patients a plant-based form of estrogen or a plant-based form of progesterone or whatever they're needing. It is compounded in a pharmacy created by plants. So it's organic, it's natural, and it has basically the same effect. And I understand this is an incredibly privileged position to be in, to be able to afford a compounded medication. But there are also little things that you can do with some research. If you have a garden, you can research the plants that are high in estrogen and start to kind of create your own compounds at home. I mean, there's so much that we have to learn in this time and space. I know that there have recently been studies that HRT is perfectly fine. Everybody has to make their own decisions about what they're going to do.
You also have to look at who's funding those studies. As a researcher myself, I learned in grad school about how dark that whole world is. It's really important to understand who funded the study. And it's also really important to understand that there are pieces of studies that don't get reported.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as face value as we like to think it is.
Right.
It's quite scandalous, to be honest.
I'm sure that it is. And I appreciate you sharing the dark world of that. I know that Big Pharma funds a lot of studies, so that makes sense. But again, you have to, I think this time of life is also a time to do as much research as you can. Part of why, in my opinion anyway, part of why this happens later in life and why it happens after theoretically your kids are at least in school and you have part of your day free is so that you have time to really look at your options. You don't have to rush and take the first pill that's recommended for you. You can look into the plants that are possible. You can look into the different routines, like your eye heat treatment routine that's helping, my castor oil packs, which are helping. You can look into the different things that are going to work for you and try them out.
Yes. Love castor oil packs myself as well. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that, I also have clients sometimes who get really on the fast moving train of research. And I also encourage them to be very wise and very careful because for anything you find, you're going to find a counter argument. I'm like,
Always.
The greatest research lives inside of your body.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so important to teach women to stop seeking outside and root internally and feel for, I don't care what the outside world says. I know what works for me. I know what intuitively feels like the right thing. And so, and also when I start working with so many women who have all these symptoms, I'm like, okay, but let's look at your relationships. You're miserable. I'd be having all those symptoms as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time you had your bare feet in the dirt or on the sand? When is the last time you lit some incense, closed a door, hung a sign and said, do not disturb for the next 30 minutes and just sat with yourself? When's the last time you pulled an oracle card? When's the last time you danced naked in front of the mirror for yourself and just communed with your temple? When is the last time? And so we often rush outside, and we also have to remember that Google is patriarchal as well.
Yes, it is.
The information that is put into Google, and I don't know if you've read the book Invisible Women, but Invisible Women, right?
Yeah, so, I love that book.
So when we talk, Invisible Women is built on all data for diets, for nutrition, for workouts, for medicine, based on the male body, not a woman's body who is changing through 4 different cycles in a month.
Right.
So and stop consulting these masculine places for the answers to the feminine life.
Also, the thing is, in order for us to intuitively know what will work for us, we have to be in our bodies. Whereas the patriarchy and the rest of the world pretty much has been teaching us to go outside of our bodies. So before we can even get to that point of intuitively choosing what research we want to do, what practices we want to try, we have to first be in our bodies. And I think that is such a hard struggle for most people. We've been taught to disconnect so that we can be overproducers, so that we can take care of our communities, so that we can do the work of maybe 10 social workers in any other country in the world. Yeah. And so we have to first let a lot of things go to have the time and the space to get into our bodies, to be able to figure out what intuitively we want to try.
Absolutely. I agree.
Will you talk to us a little bit about the midlife time and sexuality?
Yes. Similar to, I heard all the stories around childbirth, that vaginal childbirth would change sex. And it sure did in the most incredible ways. I hadn't experienced a G-spot orgasm until after my kids were born. It just opened up and turned on something deeper inside of my body that I didn't have connection to, probably most likely emotionally, because in that warrior process, in that kind of opening that I did, and allowing my body to do the work that it did, created access to parts of myself that I was able to be more vulnerable in all other regards. And so I feel that it's the same in this time of my life. And I was talking to my husband the other night, and we were talking about how I said, I don't know if you understand, honey, this is not the typical 51-year-old's experience right now. Yeah. And, it is, I'm the most sensual I've ever been in my entire life. I'm the most turned on. I'm the most alive because I'm the most rooted. Right. So I'm the most present to myself I've ever been in my life. So that in turn has me feeling the most alive, the most sensual. And when I talk about sensuality as well, I am not someone who gets into her sensuality like when it's intimate time with my partner. I'm sensual all day long. I'm sensual because I use my 5 senses to source my life. I am noticing through my 5 senses, eating food, talking to you right now, being in this studio of mine that I've created. Everything is a sensorial experience for me. I am so present to my life. There's no before this podcast or after this podcast. When I'm in this, I'm in this. And that is how I stay connected to feeling so alive. That aliveness is that turn on energy. So by the time my husband and I are, having time alone, I'm so turned on from living that my turn on just, cascades and flows into that space as well. It's not like, okay, now here's that time, that switch has to be switched. It's time for this to happen. It's a way of living. And again, I think women who are disconnected from their bodies and see intimacy as another thing to check off their list or as another performance, and who don't live their life present and with their 5 senses, it's almost impossible to access the level of sensuality I'm speaking of.
Yes. And that performativeness falls into other areas of life as well. If you are in the midst of performing for your job, performing for your kids, performing in your friendships, your in-laws, all of those things, that does carry into your sex life as well. So getting outside of that, I think, is half the challenge, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
What are your thoughts about intuitive exercise during this time of life?
I think it's incredibly important. I have to be, so honest in the fact that I don't exercise. I'm a very active person. I walk on the beach most days of the week. I dance every single day. I have my own pole. I pole dance regularly. I'm a very active person, intuitively led in the movements of my body. Similar to European women, I don't, we don't see gyms around every corner. Their lifestyle is much different than the lifestyle of Americans. I think even the fabrication of needing to have gyms and gym lifestyle is, again, very, very masculine energy. I'm not against working out. I think it's important for people, for sure, if that's what they choose, if that's what they love, all day long. But I like to approach movement, again, just as I approach food, just as I approach any other part of my living, very intuitively. And I think, I don't have skincare routines. I don't have workout routines. I don't have a morning ritual. I'm using an eye mask now, but I am a person who intuitively is following my body and what it needs all the time. And when you're doing that, it's just working out is not something that speaks to me.
I understand. I was very wonderfully blessed to live in Europe twice in my lifetime, and getting to see how women there handle midlife is, of course, so different than the way that we do. I can't speak for all of Europe. I can speak for the places where I lived, but because it is a morning routine to leave the house right when you get up, some of them put on makeup, some of them don't, run down to the bakery and get the bread for the day. Not only are you getting your morning sunlight, which is going to help your sleep cycle, but you're also walking first thing in the morning before you eat, before you do anything else, and then walking back to the house and having breakfast. I got really into that practice when I lived there. I miss it so much. I feel like our nearest I live in a city, but I think the nearest bakery to me is probably like a 5-minute drive. We haven't set up our lives that way here, which is really annoying, but we can make that for ourselves. We can get up and go outside and have like a little 20-minute walk before we sit down for breakfast or before we have our caffeine, so that we get that morning sunlight before the caffeine happens, which will help our sleep cycle.
Yes. Yeah, I think in Western civilization, particularly, I can speak from my experience living in the US and having traveled globally extensively myself, not living in other countries, which I know is a very different experience. I feel that we've created so many solutions to problems that would be resolved if we lived differently.
Right.
And I think that we are trying to solve for things that wouldn't even exist if we considered a little bit more of a natural, intuitive way of being in the world and being with Mother Nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. That being said, will you take us through one of your beautiful processes, like the ones that you share on Instagram, the breathing, something along those lines?
Yes. Do you want me to walk you through like an actual, just to share one, or to actually do one, like do one?
Yes, let's do one.
Okay. All right. So let's take what I like, the way I always bring women into starting a practice is one hand on your heart, one hand on your womb space. Even if you don't have a womb, you still can put your hand on that space of intuition that resides for all of us. And as we take a moment with our eyes closed, first a deep, full inhale, filling up as deeply into your body as possible. And exhaling everything that you were worried about moments before we started this practice. It will all be there waiting when you are done. And with another deep inhale and exhale, this time on the inhale, sending the breath as far down into your pelvic region as possible, filling yourself up. And exhaling all the worry and the doubt that you are carrying today. And in that final inhale, filling up your body even deeper, even further, all the way into your perineum. And exhaling any attachment to how. How will I do the next thing in my life? Trusting you will be guided on your path. And now I just want us to take a moment to source into, connect to this infinite potentiality that lives within your womb space. To feel all of the creation, all of the energy, all of the magic, everything that you are searching for in the outside world already lives within that space. That space between a woman's hips, in her abdomen, in her womb, has been vilified. It has been prophetized. It has been abused. It has been fracked. It has been taken from her to profit from. If we look at almost every major form of business, you've been removed further from that wisdom. And now I want us each to connect and remember that the potential of the universe itself, of life itself, resides within your womb space. And that you need not scurry around looking for someone else to solve the mysteries of your life. They don't even need solving, they just need communing with. And when you drop into that womb space, you remember that rooted power that was always yours, that was always meant for you to create from. What does it feel like inside? What does it look like inside? Warm and comforting? Does it feel dark and scary? Does it feel like uncharted territory? Maybe a place you'd like to visit and spend a little more time. Inside of your womb space, you can connect with and invite to come out of hiding your inner maiden, the little girl version of you who was wildly big and bright and believed in all of her dreams, did not doubt herself, wanted to be all of the things in the world, walked into a room with her shoulders back, excited to share what was on her heart and tell people how she felt. She's still there. Spend time with her. Often we find that our inner maiden has been forgotten, and she's hiding somewhere in the crevices of that womb space, feeling abandoned, feeling forgotten, feeling like she didn't matter. So when you feel yourself start to conform and contort and please the outside world, come back to this. Source from within. Ask your inner maiden to show up. Assure her that you will never put her in hiding again. You will never abandon her any longer. For she holds the keys to the truth that you've been swallowing entirely too long. It is often why we experience sickness inside of our womb space because we've been disconnected for so very long. Redecide, reimagine this space as the most glorious portal to your truth. When you can learn to be safe within your womb, you can learn to be safe in every room, at every table, in every conversation. Because when you're safe in your body and you commune there first, everything is a byproduct of that. And so it shall be.
Oh, Dr. Amanda, that was beautiful. I will be using that again. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
You're so very welcome.
Well, can you tell us where we can find you and when your book will be coming out, please?
Yes, you can find me on, like you mentioned earlier, Midlife Muse on social media. My website is amandahanson.com. That's with an O, Hanson. And my book will be coming out, if all goes smoothly, in January, middle of January. And I have a live event in November in Phoenix, Arizona, November 2nd and 3rd. And it is called Magnetic. And it is bringing women into this remembering, into all of the tools and practices that I use in my daily life and that I guide all of my high-level clients through so that women can have more access to how to live this vibrantly, this magnetically, because we were born that way.
Right.
We've just gotten so far removed. So it's about bringing women back into that remembrance through not just the energetics that will partake in that room, but through the demonstrations so that and the experiential things they will move through so they can leave with the imprint inside of their body. There's something so different about experiencing something rather than watching like something on a video or an inspirational piece on Instagram. It's really about time for us to get into experiences, to have physical imprints inside of our bodies of what these practices feel like.
Oh, I'm so excited for that. Thank you so much, Dr. Amanda. We appreciate you. Please keep sharing. We learned so much from you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for listening to these important conversations about cosmic leadership and the changing needs of our times. If you enjoyed this conversation, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also share it with a friend. Join our crew at Adelina East on Instagram or at Adelina East Healing on Facebook. With all the love from every dimension, Adelina.